had been working at that garage for 11 days. 11. And on the 11th day, I stood in front of a school bus with 26 kids inside, and I refused to move. My boss fired me right there in the parking lot, in front of the driver, in front of the kids, in front of everyone. He told me to get out of the way or lose my job. I lost my job. I still did not move. Nobody understood why a brand new mechanic would risk everything over a bus that had already passed inspection twice that morning. Not yet. Before I keep going, I want to say something to whoever is watching this. If you have ever noticed something nobody else could see and had to decide whether it was worth losing everything to say something about it, this channel is for you. I put up a story like this every week about ordinary who paid a real price for trusting before anyone else believed. If that sounds like you, hit subscribe. It genuinely helps more than you. Okay, let me take you back to that morning. My name is Daniel Voss, and before that morning in the parking lot, I had never so much as raised my voice at a supervisor my entire life. I was not the kind of person who caused trouble. I was the kind of person who showed up early, kept his head down, and tried not to be noticed until he had actually earned the right to be noticed. That is why what happened on the 11th day did not make sense to anyone, including, for a long time, myself. I had gotten the job at Halbrook Auto and Fleet Service, almost by accident. I had been working small jobs out of a rented bay 2 towns over, doing brake jobs and oil changes for people who found me through word of mouth, barely making enough to cover rent. When I saw the posting for a mechanic position at Halbrook, a shop that had the contract to service the school district buses, I almost did not apply. I figured a shop with a government contract would want someone with 20 years of experience, not someone like me with a 2-year certificate and a stack of unpaid invoices. But I applied anyway, and Ray Halbrook, the owner, hired me after one interview. He said he liked that I asked questions instead of pretending to already know the answers. I did not understand yet how much that single trait would matter. Ray was not a man you could dislike even when he was wrong. I want to be clear about that from the very beginning because I know how these stories usually go, and I know it is tempting to imagine the man who fired me as some kind of cold, careless boss who did not care about the kids on that bus. That was not who he was. Ray had been running that shop for almost 30 years. He had serviced buses for 3 different school districts, and he had never had a single vehicle that left his lot with a problem he could have caught. He was not reckless. He was not lazy. He checked things twice, sometimes 3 times, because he understood exactly what was writing on his signature on an inspection form. If anything, Ray was the most careful man I had ever worked for, which was part of why what happened between us cut so deep. He was not doing anything wrong by his own standards. He was doing everything right. And that morning, doing everything right was not going to be enough. The 11th day started like every other day before it. I got to the shop at 6:40 in the morning, before the sun had fully cleared the tree line behind the lot, and I started my usual walk around the bay, checking what was scheduled for the day. There were 2 buses in for their annual district inspection, numbers 14 and 22, along with the usual mix of fleet trucks from a landscaping company that used us for maintenance. Bus 14 was already up on the lift when I arrived, being handled by Grant, and the other full-time mechanic, a heavy-set man in his 50s who had been at Halbrook, almost as long as Ray had owned it. Bus 22 was still parked outside, waiting its turn, empty except for the driver doing paperwork in the front seat. I want to be honest about something. I did not walk up to that bus that morning with any sense that something was wrong. I was not looking for trouble. I was looking for the tire pressure gauge, which someone had left in the wrong drawer the day before, and my search for it took me past the rear axle of bus 22 on my way to the supply closet. That is the only reason I was even near it. If the gauge had been in its normal spot, I do not know if I ever would have noticed anything at all, and that thought alone has kept me up more nights than I would like to. What I saw in that first pass was not dramatic. I did not gasp. I did not freeze. It was small, almost nothing, the kind of thing a person walks past 100 times without a second look. But something about it caught in the back of my mind the way a word catches when you almost remember it but cannot quite pull it forward. I crouched down for maybe 4 seconds, looked closer, and then told myself I was imagining things because bus 22 had already passed its full mechanical inspection 2 hours earlier that same morning, signed off by Ray himself, and inspected a second time an hour after that by Grant as part of the district's new double-check policy following an incident at another shop the previous year. 2 experienced mechanics, 1 inspection each, both clean. Who was I, 11 days into the job, to think I had seen something they had missed? So I walked away. I found the tire gauge. I went back to my own work. And for almost 40 minutes, I managed to convince myself that whatever I had seen back there was nothing, a trick of the morning light, a shadow where a shadow should not have mattered. I remember standing at my own workbench, turning a socket wrench over in my hands without actually using it, just holding it, while my eyes kept drifting toward the window that looked out over the lot. I told myself to focus. I had a landscaping truck, waiting on a belt replacement, and I did not want to fall behind on my second week, not when I was still trying to prove I belonged there. I picked up the wrench properly. I got maybe 2 bolts in before I set it back down again. I could not stay convinced. That is the part I still cannot fully explain. Even now, even after everything that happened afterward proved I had been right. I did not have a diagram in my head. I did not have a manual open in front of me telling me exactly what I was looking at or why it mattered. What I had was a feeling that would not leave me alone. A small, insistent itch that kept pulling my attention back to that bus every time I glanced toward the lot. It was not fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling of leaving the house and being almost certain you left the stove on, except I could not have told anyone what stove or what room or what it would even mean if I was right. I tried to talk myself out of it one more time. I told myself that Ray had been doing this for 30 years, that Grant had been doing it for almost as long, that between the two of them they had probably looked underneath more buses than I had looked underneath cars in my entire life. I told myself that new guys always think they see things, that it was probably some kind of nervousness dressed up as instinct, the same way people swear they smell smoke in a house that is not on fire. None of it worked. The itch stayed exactly where it was, right behind my sternum, and it got a little worse every time I glanced at that bus sitting quiet in the morning light. Eventually I put down what I was working on and walked back outside, and this time I did not just crouch and glance. This time I got down on the ground on my back and slid myself underneath the rear axle of bus 22 with a flashlight in my hand. The gravel was cold and damp against my shoulders, the kind of early morning cold that soaks through a coverall in about 10 seconds. And I remember the smell of it too. Diesel and old rubber and wet stone. The same smell every bus underside has. Nothing unusual about it at all. Above me, I could hear the driver shift in her seat, and I caught her leaning slightly to look down out of the side window, her face pinched into a confused expression, the kind you give someone doing something that makes no sense to you. I did not blame her. I would have looked the same way. I clicked the flashlight on and swept it slowly along the axle housing, past the brake lines, past the leaf springs, working my way toward the spot that had caught my eye the first time. My heart going harder than it had any real reason to go for a routine second look. 26 kids were going to be sitting in that bus in less than 2 hours. I did not know that number yet, not exactly, but I knew there was a full route. I knew there were kids on it every single school day. And somewhere in the back of my mind, that fact kept attaching itself to the itch behind my sternum and making it worse instead of better. That is where Ray found me 4 minutes later when he walked out of the office and saw a bus that had already been cleared twice that morning with a set of legs sticking out from underneath it. Ray did not yell. That is the first thing I need people to understand about him because it explains everything that came after. He crouched down at the edge of the bus, put his hands on his knees, and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between confusion and mild irritation, the look of a man who has a schedule to keep and does not appreciate surprises in the middle of it. "Voss," he said, "what in the world are you doing under there?" That bus already cleared twice this morning. I slid myself out from underneath the axle, gravel sticking to the back of my coverall, and I sat up on the pavement trying to figure out how to explain something I could not fully explain to myself yet. "I saw something," I said. "I do not know exactly what it is. I need another minute to look at it properly." Ray glanced at his watch, then back at me. "Grant checked that bus an hour ago. I checked it myself before that." "What did you see?" This is the part where I have to be honest, because it is the part that makes the whole story make, or at least it should. I did not have an answer, not a real one. I had noticed a small amount of something on a component near the rear axle that did not look quite right to me. A slight discoloration, a texture that seemed off compared to the same part on bus 14, which I had looked at not 20 minutes earlier while helping Grant with his inspection. It was not a crack. It was not a missing bolt. It was not anything that would show up clearly on a checklist, and even as I tried to put it into words for Ray, I could hear how thin it sounded coming out of my own mouth. "I am not sure yet," I said. Something looked different to me on the axle housing, near the mounts. "I want to pull it and check it properly before that bus goes out." Ray straightened up, and I watched something shift in his face, not anger exactly, more like the particular kind of tired that comes from having heard 100 false alarms in 30 years of doing this job. "Different how?" he said. "Give me something specific, because right now you're telling me a feeling, and I cannot hold a bus for a feeling. I have 26 kids that need to be picked up in an hour and 40 minutes. And I have a district contract that says this bus passes inspection or it does not run, and it already passed twice." I did not have the specific answer he wanted. That is the truth, and it is the hardest part of this story to tell because everything that came afterward depended on me insisting on something I could not yet prove. I told him I needed time to pull the component and look closer, that I could not explain what I was seeing in a way that would satisfy a checklist, but that something about it was not sitting right with me. I told him I would take full responsibility if I was wrong. I remember saying that exact sentence standing there in the gravel with grease on my shoulder blades because it felt like the only thing I had to offer him that might buy me a few more minutes. Ray looked past me at the bus, then at his watch again, then at Grant, who had come out of the shop wiping his hands on a rag and now stood a few feet away, listening to the whole exchange with his arms folded. "Grant," Ray said, "you looked at 22 this morning. Anything on the rear axle housing catch your eye?" Grant shook his head slowly, ran the full checklist. Nothing flagged. It looked clean to me. I want to pause here and say something important, because I think this is the moment people misunderstand most when they hear stories like mine. Grant was not lying. Grant was not covering for a mistake. Grant had looked at exactly what the checklist told him to look at, in exactly the way he had been trained to look at it for over 20 years. And by every standard that existed in that shop that morning, the bus was clean. If I had been in Grant's position, with his experience and his checklist, and his 11 years less doubt in his own judgment, I probably would have signed off on it too. I have thought about that a lot since then. It is the part of the story that keeps me even now. "See," Ray said, not unkindly. "2 mechanics, 2 inspections, nothing. I need you to step back and let the driver finish loading. We are already behind." This is where I made the decision that changed everything, and I want to describe it as honestly as I can, because in the moment it did not feel brave. It felt like panic wrapped around something I could not put down. I told Ray I could not step back yet. I told him I needed 10 more minutes, just 10, to pull the part and look at it properly before the kids boarded. And if I was wrong, I would eat the time on my own, unpaid, and never bring it up again. Ray's jaw tightened. He was not an unreasonable man, but he was a man standing on his schedule that had never once failed him in 30 years, being asked to trust the instinct of someone who had been in his shop for exactly 11 days. 10 minutes, Ray said, checking his watch a third time. "You have 10 minutes to show me something real, Voss, not a feeling, something I can see." I went back under the bus with a socket set, and my hands were not steady the way I wanted them to be. I could hear the driver on her radio in the front seat, telling dispatch there might be a short delay, and I could hear Grant murmuring something to Ray a few feet away that I could not fully make out, though I caught enough of it to understand he was defending his own inspection, and rightly so. Lying on my back again, staring up at the underside of that bus, I remembered thinking very clearly that I did not actually know what I was looking for. I had a general area, a rough sense of where the discoloration had been, but pulling a mounting bolt with a socket wrench while your boss stands over you with a stopwatch running in his head is not the same as doing careful diagnostic work in a quiet bay with nobody waiting on you. My hands kept slipping on the wrench, not because the bolt was seized, but because I was shaking just slightly in a way I hoped nobody outside could see. I remember the cold of the pavement soaking through my coveralls again, and the smell of exhaust from an idling delivery truck, 2 lots over, and the small sharp sound of the socket clicking against the housing every time I repositioned it. I worked the bolt loose on the mount I wanted to examine. My fingers slick with sweat despite the cold morning air, and I kept talking to myself the way I sometimes did when I was concentrating hard on something, telling myself to slow down, to look carefully, and to not let the 10 minutes turn into a reason to rush past the very... I thought about my father, for some reason, in that moment, a man who had spent 31 years as a machinist and had a saying he repeated to me more times than I could count, that the parts that fail are rarely the ones that look broken. They are the ones that look almost fine. I did not know yet if that saying applied to anything under that bus. I only knew it kept surfacing in my head like something trying to tell me I was not imagining all of this. Somewhere in the middle of that 10 minutes, I heard tires on gravel behind me, and then the sound of a door sliding open, and then voices, a lot of them at once. The particular chaotic noise of children who have just been let off one bus and are being herded toward another. I turned my head just enough to see, past the edge of the chassis, dozens of small sneakers and backpacks moving across the lot toward bus 22, unaware that the 10 minutes Ray had given me was already more than half gone, and unaware that in a few short minutes I would be standing in front of that open door, refusing to let a single one of them climb aboard. By the time I pulled myself out from under the bus for the second time, the 10 minutes were gone, and so was any illusion that this was still a quiet, private disagreement between me and my boss. The driver had the door open. Half a dozen kids were already lined up at the bottom of the steps, backpacks on, lunchboxes swinging, waiting for the signal to climb aboard. A few of them were laughing about something, the way kids do when they have no idea an adult 20 feet away is standing in the middle of the worst decision of his working life. I had the mount. I had pulled it fully off the housing, not just loosened it, and I was holding it out toward Ray with both hands shaking slightly. Not from cold anymore, but from something closer to certainty finally arriving too late to explain itself properly. Even now, looking back, I could not have given him a textbook name for what I was looking at. I could only tell him that it did not match the same component on bus 14. That something about the way it sat, the way the surface looked under the flashlight, was different in a way that made the hair go up on the back of my neck every time I looked at it directly. "This is what you interrupted loading for," Ray said. It was not really a question. He took the part from my hands, turned it over once, twice, held it up toward the morning light. I watched his face while he did it, hoping for some flicker of recognition, some moment where his 30 years of experience would catch up to whatever my 11 days of pure nerves had stumbled onto. It did not come. Not yet. He handed it back to me with an expression that had shifted from irritation into something more tired and more final. "Daniel," he said, using my first name for the only time that whole morning, which somehow made it worse than if he had yelled. "I have looked at a lot of parts in 30 years. This looks like a part that has done its job for a long time and is due for routine replacement at the next scheduled service. That is all. It is not a failure. It is wear. We flag it, we schedule it, and the bus runs its route today like it is supposed to." I told him I did not think it was routine wear. I told him something about the pattern did not look like the wear pattern I had learned to recognize in school, that it looked wrong in a way I could not fully name, and I asked him, one more time, for a little more time, enough to call the parts distributor and check a specification I was not confident about. Ray shook his head slowly, and I could see in his face that he was not being cruel. He was being exactly as careful as his job had trained him to be for 3 decades. Weighing a driver already behind schedule, a district contract with strict timing requirements, 2 clean inspections from 2 experienced mechanics, against the uncertain instinct of a man he had known for 11 days. "We are done here," Ray said. "Get back to the belt job. Driver, go ahead and load them up." This is the moment. This is the part of the story I have replayed more times than any other moment of my life, because everything that happened afterward, everything that eventually proved me right, depended entirely on what I chose to do in the next 4 or 5 seconds. Standing in that parking lot with a stranger's part still in my hand and 26 kids starting to climb the steps behind me. I did not hand the part back. I did not step aside. I walked around the front of the bus and stood directly in the open doorway, blocking it with my body, facing the driver, facing the first few kids already on the bottom step, and I said as calmly as I could manage with my heart slamming against my ribs, that nobody was getting on that bus until someone from the district or the manufacturer confirmed that part was safe. Before I go any further, I want to ask something of whoever is watching this, because I think about this part of the story more than any other. Have you ever been completely sure of something in your gut before you had a single piece of proof to back it up and had to decide whether it was worth the fallout to say something anyway? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the stories people share with me are more intense than anything I have lived through myself. Ray's face changed in a way I had not seen from him before. It was not rage. I want to be precise about that, because rage would have been easier to understand and easier to forgive. It was something closer to disbelief, the look of a careful, reasonable man watching an employee he barely knew publicly override his judgment in front of a driver, a line of children, and a parking lot that was starting to fill with parents dropping off stragglers for the next route. He walked toward me slowly, and I remember every step of it, the gravel crunching under his boots, Grant standing frozen by the shop door with the rag still in his hand, the driver looking back and forth between the two of us with her hand hovering near the radio. "Move," Ray said. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it land harder than shouting would have. "I'm telling you, as your employer, to step away from that door right now." I did not move. I remember my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else, planted there in front of that open door, the part still clutched in my right hand, close enough to the kids on the steps that I could hear one of them ask another, in the careless, curious way children ask things, whether the new mechanic was in trouble. "Ray," I said, "if I am wrong, you can fire me right now, right here in front of everyone, and I will not say one word. But I'm asking you to hold this bus for 20 minutes while someone checks this part properly. That is all I am asking." For a moment, maybe 2 full seconds, I thought he was going to give me those 20 minutes. Something crossed his face, a flicker of the same who had hired me 11 days earlier, because I asked questions instead of pretending to already know the answers. But then his eyes moved past me, toward the line of now pulling into the lot behind the buses, toward the district supervisor's car that had just turned in through the gate for a routine visit that could not have come at a worse possible time. I watched him make a calculation that had nothing to do with whether I was right or wrong, and everything to do with what it would look like for the owner of a fleet service contract to hold up a school bus in front of a district official because a brand new mechanic had a feeling. "I have given you every chance to do this the right way," Ray said, and his voice had gone flat now, stripped of the tiredness, stripped of the patience, down to something hard and final. "You are done here, Daniel. You are fired. Get your things out of my shop and get away from that door." I heard the words land, and some part of me understood, even in that moment, that I had just watched 30 years of a careful, reasonable man's judgment collide head-on with 11 days of mine, and that by every rational measure available to either of us standing in that parking lot, he had every right to make the call he made. I didn't hate him for it. I do not hate him for it now. But knowing that did not change what my body did next, which was nothing. I did not step aside. I didn't hand back the part. I stood in that doorway with 26 kids waiting behind me in a district supervisor's car easing into a parking spot not 40 feet. For the first time since I had walked into that lot 11 days, I felt completely, terrifyingly certain that if I moved even one step, something was going to happen on that route that no one would ever be able to take back. The district supervisor's name was Carol Ibsen, and I did not know that yet, standing in that doorway with my legs locked and my job already gone. What I knew was that a woman in a gray blazer had stepped out of a sedan with a district logo on the door, clipboard in hand, and was now walking directly toward the growing commotion around bus 22 with the unhurried, unbothered pace of someone who had seen plenty of parking lot arguments before and did not expect this one to be any different. "Ray," she said, reaching the edge of the crowd that had gathered. Parents now standing near their cars watching. The driver still frozen behind the wheel with the radio mic in her hand. Grant hovering by the shop entrance, not sure whether to intervene or stay out of it entirely. What is going on here? "I have a scheduled visit, and I'm seeing a bus full of kids that has not left the lets." Ray turned to her, and I watched him try to compress everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes into something that would sound reasonable to a district official standing in front of him with a clipboard. He told her honestly that a new employee had raised a concern about a component, that 2 experienced mechanics had inspected the bus and found nothing, and that the employee, now former employee, was refusing district transport standard procedure by physically blocking the bus doorway. He was not wrong about any of it. I want to be clear about that. Every word he said to her was true. Carol looked at me for the first time then, really looked, the way you look at someone you are trying to size up quickly with limited information. "You are the one who noticed something," she said. It was not a question either. I told her, as clearly and as calmly as I could manage, with my heart still hammering, exactly what I had told Ray. I told her I could not give her a textbook name for the defect, that I had pulled them out and looked at it, and something about the wear pattern did not match what I had seen on the identical part on bus 14-20 minutes earlier. I held the part out toward her, and she took it, and unlike Ray, who had looked at it for maybe 3 seconds before handing it back, she turned it slowly under the light for a long moment, her thumb running along the edge of it in a way that told me she had spent time around mechanical components before this job put her behind a desk. "This looks like heat discoloration," she said mostly to herself, tilting it another few degrees toward the sun. "Not surface rust, not standard wear polish, standard. This is bluing." I did not know the word yet, not in any technical sense, but hearing someone else name the thing I had only been able to feel was wrong, sent a wave of something through me that I still do not have a clean word for, somewhere between relief and terror, because if she was right, it meant I had not been imagining anything at all, and it also meant that bus had been running with a problem that neither Ray nor Grant, with their combined 50 years of experience, had caught in 2 separate inspections that same morning. "Bluing means heat," Carol said, looking up at Ray now instead of me. "Significant sustained heat in a component that should never get anywhere close to that temperature under normal operating load. I want that wheel pulled before this bus moves another foot." I watched something happen in Ray's face that I will never forget as long as I live. It was not embarrassment exactly, and it was not defensiveness either, though I think a lesser man might have reached for both. It was the look of someone recalculating in real time everything he thought he understood about the morning, running back through his own inspection and Grant's inspection and trying to figure out how 2 careful, experienced sets of eyes had missed something that a district official could apparently identify from 3 feet away in under a minute. To his credit, and I want to say this plainly because it matters, Ray did not argue with her. He did not defend himself. He turned immediately to Grant and told him to get the jack and pull the wheel, right there, in front of the parents, in front of the kids who were now being quietly walked back toward the shuttle bus by a second driver who had come over to help manage the situation. I stood off to the side while they worked, still technically fired, still technically not allowed anywhere near that bus, but nobody told me to leave, and I did not offer to go. I watched Grant jack up the rear axle, watched him pull the wheel free, and watched his face change the exact same way Ray's had changed only a few minutes earlier, the particular expression of a man who has done something the same way 10,000 times and is now looking at proof that this one time it had not been enough. The hub was exposed now. Sitting there in the morning light in front of everyone, Ray on one knee beside Grant, Carol standing over both of them with her clipboard forgotten at her side, and even from where I was standing, a good 10 feet back, I could see that the bearing surface did not look the way a bearing surface was supposed to look. There was a faint, uneven ring of color running around part of the race. Not rust, not grease residue, something with a subtle bluish cast to it that seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle you looked at it from. Exactly the way Carol had described from the part I had pulled myself. Grant reached in with 2 fingers and turned the bearing slowly by hand, and I watched him pause, then turn it again. Slower this time, listening as much as looking. "There is play in this," Grant said quietly, more to Ray than to anyone else, though everyone standing close enough could hear him. "There should not be play in this. Not this much." Ray did not say anything for a long moment. He reached out and took the bearing assembly from Grant, turned it himself, felt whatever Grant had felt, and I watched a man who had run that shop for 30 years go very still, and very quiet in a way I had not seen from him all morning. Not during the argument, not during the firing, not even when Carol had first said the word, bluing out loud in front of everyone. Whatever he was feeling under his hands right then was different from anything that had come before it, and I did not yet understand exactly what it meant, only that it clearly meant something serious, because the parking lot had gone almost completely silent. Parents and drivers and Grant and Carol all watching Ray turn that bearing over in his palm like a man reading something written in a language he had spent 30 years learning to read fluently, and did not like what it said. "Get me the torque log for this bus," Ray said finally without looking up, "and get me the maintenance history going back 6 months. I want to see every hand that has touched this axle before today." Carol was already writing something on her clipboard, her expression unreadable, and I remember standing there watching the two of them, Ray and Grant, both kneeling over that exposed hub in the gravel, both of them clearly seeing something now that had been invisible to them less than an hour earlier, and I felt something shift in my chest that was not quite vindication yet, because I still did not fully understand what I had found, only that whatever it was real, and it had been sitting there under that bus the entire time, waiting for somebody to notice it before 26 kids climbed aboard and rode it out onto the highway. The maintenance history came out of the shop office 10 minutes later, carried by the part-time bookkeeper who worked mornings, and Ray spread the pages out across the hood of a park service truck, while Carol, Grant, and I stood around him in a loose half-circle that nobody had planned but that had formed anyway. The way people gather when they can tell something important is about to be understood. Ray ran his finger down the log, page after page, until he stopped on a new entry from 11 weeks earlier, a routine bearing repack performed not at Halbrook, but at a satellite service location the district used for overflow work during a heavy maintenance season. "Right there," Ray said, tapping the page hard enough that the truck hood rang faintly under his finger. "Bearing service, 11 weeks back." "Not us. Contracted out." Carol leaned over to read it, her jaw tightening slightly, and I could see her already anticipating where this was going before Ray said another word. What had happened, as it was pieced together over the following 20 minutes, standing there in that parking lot with the wheel still off and the bearing sitting exposed on a shop rag, was this. During that outside service call, the technician had repacked the wheel bearing with grease as required, but had not applied the correct amount, and more importantly had reassembled the hub with a preload torque slightly outside the manufacturer's specification, tight enough that it would not fail an initial inspection, but wrong enough that under the specific combination of load and heat generated by that particular bus route, which included a long uphill grade. The other buses did not run. The bearing had been running warmer than it should have for weeks, slowly working itself toward failure, one route at a time. "Bluing," Carol explained, standing over the exposed hub, with her clipboard now actually being used to take notes, "happens when metal reaches high enough to change its surface structure and color without necessarily looking damaged in an experienced eye, or even to an experienced eye doing a fast visual check under a checklist. A bearing running under an incorrect preload does not always announce itself with grinding noise or obvious heat in the first weeks. It runs a little hot, a little rough, slowly polishing and discoloring its own race with every mile, right up until the point where the internal clearances degrade enough that the wheel begins to develop play, the exact play Grant had felt with his own fingers only minutes earlier. Past that point, the timeline for full failure was not measured in months. It was measured in trips, possibly the very next one. Ray straightened up slowly and looked at the part in his hand for a long moment, and then he looked over at me, still standing off to the side in my grease-stained coveralls, technically fired, technically not supposed to be anywhere near that bus. I do not think I will ever forget the way he said what he said next, because there was nothing dramatic about it, no big speech. Just a man who had spent 30 years being right about buses finally admitting, out loud, in front of a district official and his other mechanic parking, that he had been wrong. "You saw this an hour before it would have shown up on any checklist I have ever used," Ray said. "I do not know how. I do not think you know how either." "But you did." I told him honestly that I still could not fully explain it, that I had not known the word bluing, had not known anything about preload torque or bearing failure timelines, only that something about the surface of that part had looked wrong to me in a way I could not put into a sentence that would have satisfied his checklist. Ray nodded slowly, turning the bearing over once more in his hand, and for a moment neither of us said anything else because there was not really anything left to argue about. The proof was sitting right there in his palm, physical and undeniable, the kind of proof that did not require anyone to trust a feeling or an instinct or a new employee's nervous insistence. It required only a pair of eyes and a basic understanding of what a healthy bearing was supposed to look like. And once you knew what you were looking at, it was, in fact, completely obvious. Carol closed her clipboard and turned to Ray with an expression that had gone from cautious to something more serious. "This bus is out of service until that satellite location is investigated," she said. I want to know how many other district vehicles that technician touched in the last 3 months. And I want a written statement from your new hire about exactly what he observed and when. He's not my new hire anymore, Ray said quietly, and for a second my stomach dropped all over again, thinking somehow the firing was still going to stand even after everything that had just happened in front of everyone. But then Ray turned to look directly at me, and something in his expression had shifted into a kind of tired, honest respect I had not seen from him at any point that morning, not even when he had hired me 11 days earlier. Daniel, he said, I fired you 20 minutes ago because you would not move out of a doorway when I told you to. I still think, given what I knew at that exact moment, that firing you was the reasonable decision. Any owner in my position looking at 2 clean inspections and a driver behind schedule and a new employee with nothing but a feeling would have made the same call. But I was wrong about the bus, and I am not too proud to say that in front of all these people. I did not know what to say to that. I remember standing there in the gravel, still holding a rag I had picked up at some point without noticing, watching a man who had run a shop successfully for 30 years say something that most bosses I had worked for before him would never have said out loud, let alone in front of a district supervisor in a parking lot full of parents who were now watching the entire exchange with a kind of quiet, uncertain interest. For what it is worth, I said,
I do not think you did anything unreasonable. If Grant had told me what he told you, with what you both knew this morning, I probably would have made the same call. I just could not stop looking at that part. Ray almost smiled at that, the first real softening in his face all morning, though it did not quite make it all the way there. That is the part that bothers me the most, honestly, he said. 30 years, and I have never once had a new hire push back on me like that. Most people would have taken the 10 minutes I gave you, come up empty, and let it go. You did not let it go. Carol, who had been listening to all of this while filling out what I would later learn was an incident report required any time a district vehicle was pulled from active service mid-route, looked up from her clipboard and addressed both of us at once. I'm going to need everyone's account of this morning in writing, including yours, Mr.
Voss, whether you are currently employed here or not, she said. But I want to say, off the record, that what happened here today is exactly the kind of catch that keeps me up at night when it does not happen. I have seen bearing failures on the highway. They are not gentle. I felt something tighten in my chest at that. The full weight of what almost happened finally landing somewhere real instead of abstract. 26 kids on a bus with a wheel bearing that had been quietly cooking itself toward failure for 11 weeks, one uphill grade at a time, and nobody would have known anything was wrong until the moment it stopped being fine. On a highway, at speed, with no warning at all. Ray rubbed the back of his neck,
looked at the bearing one more time, then looked back at me, and I could see him working through something in his head before he finally said it out loud, in front of Grant, in front of Carol, in front of the parents still lingering near their cars trying to understand exactly what they had just watched us. I would like you to come back to work, Ray said, today, if you're willing. I know that is not a simple thing to ask given how the morning.
But I meant what I said. I made the reasonable call with what I had, and it still turned out to be the wrong one, and I would rather have a mechanic willing to lose his job over something he cannot fully explain than one who lets a bus go, because the checklist says it is clean. I took the job back. I did not make him wait for an answer, and I did not ask for anything extra in return. No apology written down, no formal correction to my record. I did not need any of that.
I think what I needed, standing in that gravel lot with grease on my shoulders and 26 kids being quietly loaded onto a replacement bus behind me, was simply to know that being right had mattered, even if it had cost me everything for about 20 minutes. Grant walked over before I left that day and told me, in his own quiet way, that he did not think less of himself for missing what I had caught.
He said something I have carried with me ever since, that in 30 years of inspecting buses, this was the first time he had ever been grateful to be wrong about something. I understood exactly what he meant. Nobody in that parking lot walked away embarrassed. Ray did not lose the district contract.
The satellite location was investigated, and 2 other buses were found with the same improperly torqued bearings before they ever left a lot with kids inside them. I never told anyone, not even Ray, exactly how I knew to look under that bus in the first place. I still do not have a clean answer.
I only know that something about the way that part sat under the flashlight refused to let me walk away from it, and that I would rather be the new mechanic who got fired for 4 minutes over a feeling I could not explain than the experienced one who signed off on something because the checklist told him it was fine. The bus ran its route the next morning with a new bearing properly packed and torqued to specification. 26 kids on board, the same driver behind the wheel,
and nobody on it ever knew how close that morning had come to going differently. That is usually how it goes in this line of work. The moments that matter most are the ones nobody else ever hears about, unless somebody decides to stand in a doorway and refuse to move. A few weeks later, Carol called the shop directly and asked to speak with me, not Ray.
She told me the district had opened a formal review of every vehicle serviced by that satellite location over the previous 6 months, and that 2 more buses had been pulled from active routes after the same preload issue was found on their rear axles, caught early this time before anything close to failure. She did not make a big production out of it. She simply said that what I had noticed that morning had likely prevented more than one incident, not just the one everyone had been standing around watching. I remember sitting in the shop office after that call, not saying much of anything, just letting it settle. Ray never brought up the firing again after that day, and neither did I. It was not the kind of thing either of us needed to revisit out loud, but I noticed something change in the weeks that followed. When I raised a concern about something that looked slightly off, even something small, even something I could not fully explain in checklist language, Ray stopped asking me to prove it before he would give me the time to look closer. He would just nod, glance at his watch the way he always did, and tell me to take what I needed. That, more than any apology, was the thing that told me he had actually heard what happened that morning. I still think about those 4 minutes I spent fired, standing in that doorway with the strangers bearing housing in my hand, more than almost anything else from that first year. I do not think of it as the day I proved I was right.
I think of it as the day I learned that being right and being able to explain why you are right are two very different, and that sometimes the second one only arrives after you have already paid for the first. If a story like this means something to you, I would love to hear which part of it stuck with you. And if you want more stories like this one, about ordinary who trusted what they knew before anyone else believed them, I put one up every.
Thank you for staying with me through this one. I will see you in the next story.